Before news broke yesterday that South Carolina Circuit Court Judge Bentley Price had been found unqualified in a 5-5 vote of the Judicial Merit Selection Commission, I sat down with Molly Vick, who attended the November 14th public hearing to gain some perspective into the process that had affected her so personally. During our conversation, Molly and I discussed her observations into the process and the testimony and questions Judge Price faced during the contentious hearing. If you missed Molly's courageous October 9th interview with FITSNews founding editor Will Folks, I encourage you to go back and check it out on YouTube. So I am here today with Molly Vick, and some of you will remember Molly, who did a very courageous and very powerful interview with Fitz founding editor Will Folks. Believe that was October, right? Am I right?
Yes.
Okay,
October
time's been flying this fall.
7th.
So Molly and Will talked a lot about her experience with Judge Bentley Price, who is a circuit court judge in South Carolina. And he's been quite the topic of discussion over the past year in terms of, his sentences, bonds that are given. And Molly was brave enough to come forward and speak to Will about her experience. And I don't want to rehash everything, but do you want to just give a brief background for anybody who's new? And for anybody who has not seen Molly's first interview, I highly recommend going back and watching it. It is on our YouTube channel. It is fabulous. Molly's fabulous. So, but if you want to give us a little brief background, and we won't make you relive the whole thing again.
Sure. So I was in an abusive relationship a few years ago, and the person who abused me he pled guilty to second-degree domestic violence and harassment. And while he was out on bond for that, he actually got a DV hand charge, which is domestic violence of a high and aggravated nature, against the girlfriend that he was with after me, which is, in layman's terms, like the domestic violence version of a attempted murder, pretty much. And that was in a year to the day. June 3rd of 2021 is when the police came to help me, and I left him completely, got a protective order, all of that. And June 3rd of 2022 is when he got the DV hand charge with the girlfriend following me. And he was in front of Bentley Price in September of last year of 22. And
this was when you were expecting to be there for his sentencing, right?
Right, correct.
Okay.
And it was after, a long and not long. Actually, it wasn't even long. Let me rephrase that. It wasn't long, but it seemed to be very complicated to everyone that I spoke with, as far as victims advocates and the solicitor's office and the city of Charleston, because he had 3 victims in 1 year.
We're just going to let that hang because
right.
I want you to remember 3 victims in 1 year
3 victims
when Molly
in
gets
1
the
year.
next part.
And his violence got progressively worse within that year. He almost killed the person after me. And I had pleaded with the solicitor's office. I had pleaded with anyone who held authority that would listen. Please, he's going to kill someone. He is going to kill someone. This behavior is getting worse and worse and worse. This is terrifying. It's not even just about me anymore. But there are no women in your community that are safe at this point. And that kind of got brushed off, and he was in front of Judge Price with his defense attorneys from Leeds Avenue. Not the attorneys weren't from Leeds Avenue, but he had been incarcerated there. He was being held at Leeds Avenue at Alcannon Detention Center for a couple of months over that last summer. And I didn't know any of the other victims. We were completely unrelated. He's not from here. And so after a lot of continuances for different things, his charges kind of got consolidated and then just swept under the rug for the most part. But Judge Bentley Price was on the bench for that docket, and he gave him a 14-year sentence suspended to 5 years of probation, to our dismay. And he didn't let us read our victims' impact statements, and he kicked us out of his courtroom for crying before he even finished reading the sentence.
So you guys each had a victim's impact statement prepared. You were ready to say how this has impacted your lives, and you didn't even have the opportunity to read that.
Right, correct.
And he was given 14 years.
Suspended to 5 years probation.
Mm-hmm.
Which was really, it wasn't even that part that was difficult. The solicitor's office asked for 6 to 10 years, given his history of violence against women, given his open warrants in North Carolina for violating protective orders against women, given his extensive rap sheet of strangulation on a woman, domestic violence towards a woman, harassment, cyber stalking, the list goes on and on. And when we were in the courtroom, it was basically, it felt like an episode of Jerry Springer, essentially, with his lawyers just slandering all three of our characters and didn't even know which one of us was which was also a theme in that entire situation. I would call a victim's advocate to check on what was going on, and she'd ask, which one are you? Because again, there were 3 of us in 1 year that were...
Are you seeing a trend?
Right.
So Judge Bentley Price, this is obviously not the first story that we did on him, but it's the first time we were able to really connect with somebody whose, his decisions while on the bench affected directly. And he is right now going through the South Carolina judicial selection process. And part of that process is you go in front of the Judicial Merit Selection Commission for a public hearing. And during those public hearings, people are given the opportunity to submit affidavits and potentially speak as to why, they believe that Judge Price should not be on the bench. And prior to going to that commission, the South Carolina Bar Judicial Qualifications Committee they do a review of judges, and they found him unqualified under the category of reputation. So he was going into this hearing unqualified. And we expected it to be long and very contentious, which it was. And Molly, you felt compelled to go to this hearing. You did not have the opportunity to speak during this hearing, but it was on the calendar and you're like, I want to go. I want to see this process. Can you tell me a little bit about your decision to go and, what it was like for you?
My decision, so there were kind of, the reason that I didn't speak is because I didn't write an affidavit in time to be heard. And that's okay, because the deadline was, I think, October 23rd, and I had just interviewed with y'all a couple of weeks before, which was ironically as soon as we filmed. Will Folks checked his phone and he saw that the bar had deemed him unqualified. So it was
I remember that.
Yeah, it was just really uncanny timing there. So I didn't want to beat a dead horse by writing an affidavit, because I'm not personally out for this person's blood, but I did want to see how the committee conducted these hearings. And I wanted to see, I wasn't even really concerned about what other people had to say about him, because after I interviewed with y'all, people that I have never heard of or spoken to reached out to me telling me their own stories. And I know I'm not a special case, which is scarier to me. So
right.
I really wanted to see what was going to be asked of him, maybe more so who was going to complain against him, how the meetings were held. I was just interested in the entire process, and I went with no expectations. It was hard to be quiet.
Right. There was a couple of points that I was watching it and I was like thinking to myself, I can't believe Molly was sitting there and kept her mouth shut.
Thank you.
I thought about you the whole time I was watching it. And now these hearings are not publicly available. The transcripts are made available afterwards, but Dylan's been trying to, our director of special projects, has been trying to attend some of these just to give people an insight and get, video of these hearings so that people can see what happens. The beginning of the hearing, what they do is they bring out people that have submitted affidavits and are speaking in front of the commission. And that took up, I think, at least half, if not a little more. I know Dylan and I were both like, well, it dragged a lot because they did talk a lot about civil litigation and not the criminal litigation. But you made some really good points when we were discussing it prior to recording about how that part, while it dragged, it really did matter. And
Yes.
I wanted to get your opinion on when you're listening to that, how you felt about the people that were speaking to the commission about Judge Price.
So, and I want to start by saying also, I think that the people that were on the panel did a really good job of at least appearing. I mean, I don't know them, but like at least appearing fair and diplomatic with their questions and their concerns. I don't think that the gravity is being missed with his behavior. And so the first person that was a complainant was kind of a random guy. I was a little confused, like something about him being in jail. I think it was like a procedural thing. So
it had something to do with like bonds. I can't remember the exact circumstances, but yeah.
Yeah. But then the second time that they called someone up, they didn't call someone, they called like 6 people's names at one time. And I'm thinking, that's interesting. And 4 people stood up and went up together, and they were originally there because they were part of a probate case for a person. So that's where all the complex like civil litigation came in, was the case itself that they were the lawyers for. But they received a really, really inappropriate and quite frankly threatening email that was super unprofessional from Bentley Price. And they stood up and they said, one of them was a law professor who taught 2 of the senators on the panel, and I could tell that they had respect for this man and that they've known him for a long time. And between the lawyers combined, there's like over 300 years of experience. Most of them have been on the SC bar for over 30 or 40 years. Right. And they said, we've never experienced this kind of behavior from a judge, and South Carolina deserves better. They said he's intemperate and incompetent.
Interesting words. And that temper, I mean, that's something that you saw in the sentencing hearing for your abuser.
Right. And I just thought it spoke a lot. The letter essentially, I'm trying to figure out how to like condense it a little bit, but he basically wrote a letter to this panel of lawyers and called them unethical, said that they were tiptoeing the lines of ethical conduct. He was just so very out of line, and they took high offense to it, obviously, because they're well respected, and just the way in which he spoke to them, they said it terrified their client.
Right.
It terrified her.
And these are very experienced and very respected attorneys.
Yes.
So, you have to think, if he was sending communications like that to an attorney who had less experience, it was a little more green, how that could affect, your case if they're representing you.
Right. I mean,
Yeah.
I would be blindsided if I had, if I was just out of law school and had no personal experience with all of the weirdness that I've gotten the experience.
Gotten more firsthand experience in the court system than
it would be highly discouraging and confusing and offensive, and I would feel really, for lack of a better word, he's a bully. He is a bully, point blank.
Right. So, I thought those were that was a really good point to me, is that these names, they're huge names. They're law professors. They are, known attorneys throughout the state. They're respected attorneys, and they submitted an affidavit and came in front of the commission to discuss their concerns with him. And the commission, from what, and there's much discussion about, whether how we appoint our judges in South Carolina is a good way to do it. But, I do agree with you. When I was watching it, I did feel as though they were listening very intently. They were taking these concerns very seriously, except for one individual. We'll get into that later. But yeah, I was impressed with the process. We'll see how it turns out. But then they went into questions for Judge Price from the commission. And so what they do is they send out anonymous ballot box surveys to everybody in the South Carolina bar. These surveys are returned, they're anonymous, and they rate the judges, and they give feedback on the judges' performances. And there's a section for individuals to include comments. And they were, when they started getting into the questioning, the commission said that they received a total of 822 ballot box surveys regarding Judge Price, and 199 of those had additionally written comments. There were several positive comments. We'll make sure we mention those. But 76 of those written comments expressed additional concerns, which, according to the commission, is a really high number. They don't usually get that many surveys back. They don't usually get that many comments, and they definitely don't get that many concerns. So that's when they take these surveys and they go into the questioning of the candidates. And that's where I thought that this is where, for me, it got very interesting, and I perked up, because they were talking about a lot of the things that we had been covering and that had affected people like you throughout the years that he has been on the bench. What did you think about their questioning of him?
I think they all felt like he embarrassed the entire system.
Right.
And the amount of attention that has been brought upon him from his own actions. Okay, people aren't out to get him. This is his misconduct, his behavior, his temperament, the way he treats people, and his lack of empathy, those are my words, not theirs. But I think that they were fair to say, we know you're a hard worker. We know, they patted him on the back.
You do have good qualities. Everybody has good qualities.
Right. But they were also going, we can't get past the fact that all of these women have accused you of misconduct and unfair treatment.
Right. And actually, we're going to break right here. We'll let Dylan clip to that part about women, so I'm not reading it because I think it's more effective if you hear it. Okay. But yeah, we'll listen to them talk about Bentley Price and his treatment of women and his response.
Yeah.
So there are a couple comments and some reports that have been made public in regards to some concerns about inappropriateness of treatment of women. How would you like to respond to that?
I don't want to talk about mine and Mr. Dennis's communication, but I think that he would tell you how flabbergasted I was when I heard that. I was offended. I think that was the only thing that I took complete and total offense to. Was that somebody would say that I treated women any different, women lawyers, women anything, any different whatsoever. I obviously have the utmost respect for females, female attorneys, and that is the one comment anonymously by the bar that I took the most offense with. I don't want to get upset. I take that much offense to it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
He seemed extremely, he said flabbergasted is the word he used. He was shocked that people would think that he did not treat women fairly. What that was the part of the hearing when I was listening to it, and I was like, oh, I'm surprised Molly was able to sit in her chair. When you were listening to that, how did you feel?
I feel like if there are that many women who have accomplished law school and there are that many women who are members of the SC bar saying whatever specifically they said, that speaks volumes.
If one, I mean, to me, if one does, it speaks volumes. Did you feel as though, I mean, when you were in his courtroom, did you feel as though you were respected?
Absolutely not.
Right?
Absolutely not. And a running theme with people who are in his courtroom as victims of a case or as family members of victims of a case, and not only feel disrespected, but just, I don't know if there's a word for it. Honestly, right. I really don't think there's a word for it, because his lack of empathy and his inflated ego are so very apparent. And while I understand that he has important decisions to make regarding people's lives, whether they go to jail or not, my livelihood was at risk. My life was at risk.
Right.
And if you aren't going to let me cry in your courtroom, no one was having a fit here. And even if we were, this man has almost killed 2 out of 3 women.
Right.
And then stalked, harassed, like the whole 9. And he allowed a lawyer to say that I was a prostitute as if it made it like a free pass to assault sex workers.
Right.
So I wasn't even mad that I was slandered. I was like, oh, wait, okay, so this entire courtroom gives freebies if you just
you're not going to stop
no one
this
is cared about.
Right. Right.
And like, little do they, I really didn't even want to bring this up, but I felt highly disrespected, not even for the prostitute comment. My grandfather was the director of media for Procter & Gamble for 40 years. He was on the Hilton Head Town Council. He worked really, really hard. Like, he and my grandmother worked really, really hard and contributed to the Low Country community in which they resided. Not for this to ever be a thing. Not just for me, but in general.
Right.
My godfather's dad was a court in the Low Country for decades. They did not work there. They didn't work so hard to be slapped in the face with absolutely disgraceful behavior like this.
Yeah. So I was, the entire hearing, I'm sitting here waiting for Todd Rutherford, Representative Rutherford, to speak. And he certainly did not disappoint. It ended up exactly where I would thought it was going to be, where, he really pushed back and said, there are, this is a prosecution issue. It's not their recommended pleas. one, did that surprise you? Did you see it coming? How did you feel when you heard the response from a state representative and an attorney and a member of the commission?
Yeah, so again, like not I don't want to like heavily slam or heavily praise anyone, but I found it really interesting when he was talking about, where does that responsibility come into play? They do have a say as well. They do have a responsibility as well. And I mean, more than anyone, as far as I understand, So I mean, I felt like I was really misled by the solicitor's office here, and I tried to be in contact with them. I provided them all of the photographs they needed, everything, all of the documentation. I stayed in touch with them. They changed my victim's advocate without telling me. I got a new one. The new one didn't even know what was going on with any of the cases, concerning all three of us as victims. And then we were not told before his sentencing that had been negotiated already. So I sat in that courthouse for half of my day, not only terrified and anxious and just like sick to my stomach over the whole thing, but they already knew that they were going to give him probation. They knew that. They knew that, and they had to know that going in.
Right. It was negotiated ahead of time, and they had 3 victims in the courtroom ready to give victim impact statements.
Right.
And none of that was communicated to you. You were sitting there not knowing what's going to happen, anxious, and they already knew the outcome, likely outcome.
They did know the outcome. They did know. I mean, I can't even be mad at the judge for that.
Right.
That was arranged before I even stepped a foot in his courtroom.
Right.
So, I'm not as like angry as I was, but it was a very confusing and hurtful and upsetting thing to be a part of, because it felt like my entire situation was mocked.
Right.
That my time was toyed with, and then I was slandered and then like excused before anybody could even tell me what he meant, in like the brain rattling moment of like 14 years suspended to 5 years probation. So, I mean, Rutherford had a point there. And at no point do I recall the assistant solicitor who was in charge of it speaking up and saying anything in my defense or the defense of the other 2 people.
Just allowing it to continue.
I mean, she looked horrified in her, in her defense, but like, if you're an assistant solicitor, you can't be horrified of the people that you're protecting.
Right. Right. That's your job.
Right. Speak up and say that's enough. Do something. I mean, being able to say that you asked for 6 to 10 years, but then and as a victim, I trusted the solicitor's office. I thought that was their job. There was no point in me getting a personal attorney in my, like, why would I if the solicitor's office is prosecuting it?
Right.
For me to be blown off, made a mockery of, I wasn't stood behind whatsoever. So he did have a point there. It's not just the judges, and it's, I really don't think it's fair to just point out one person or one small group of people when it's certainly it's a multifaceted and much more dynamic issue than just one bad egg in a basket, because there's a bad egg in every basket. So like, maybe we should take a step back and look at how they all work together or don't.
Right. And how they communicate to the people that their actions affect. I mean, that is the kind of thing. I mean, when you're dealing with victims of abuse and assault who are already, traumatized, and they're dealing with all of this and the stress of court, it's communication with the victims is so critical.
Right.
I cannot overstate that. insight into what to expect is the very least that they can provide.
Right. And, you know, in multiple phone calls that I made to them, I was I told them, this was before the girl after me even got assaulted. I said, someone is going to die. Who's going to take responsibility for it when they do, when he kills somebody?
Right.
I don't know.
I don't want to be right about this,
we're a
but
reactive court, not a proactive court. Well, obviously you're neither.
Right. Exactly.
And this man is just out in Charleston
doing.
And like I said before, I prayed for that judge's family, his wife and kids, when I walked out of his courtroom. And I don't say that like I prayed for them from him, but I prayed for them. It was my first instinct, and I just hope nothing like severe ever happens to them, because the world that he lives in is not real life.
Right.
And certain things can happen to anybody. You can come from a good family. You can come from a well-intentioned family. You can come from a hard-working family who has solid reputations in the community, who knows everyone. And it can still happen to you or to your daughter or your sister or your wife or your mom or your aunt or whoever. But like at the same time, I'm still a person. Whether or not I'm anything to anyone else, I'm still a woman and I'm still a person.